Start with a clean classification of service models and shared responsibility so your later findings do not wobble. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and managed services shift the control line. And the only way to make that line credible is to write it down with owners and evidence next to each control. In IaaS, you inherit hypervisor and facility from the provider, but you still own virtual networks, instances, operating systems, keys, and a long list of configuration surfaces. In PaaS, you shift even more to the provider, runtime, scaling planes, and many patch duties, while still owning identity, data classification, and traffic policy. In SaaS and managed services, you invert the equation again by demanding attestations, configuration exports, and logs that prove the vendor runs the controls you would otherwise run. The assessor's skill is to look at a single requirement, say strong authentication for admin access, and ask, who does this here? Where is it configured? And what artifact proves it today? That is how classification becomes evidence, not a diagram. Define segmentation in virtual networks with the same seriousness you apply on-prem. Security groups, microsegmentation policies, distributed firewalls, network ACLs, and routing must isolate the cardholder data environment and its supporting services from workstations, development zones, and internet-facing tiers. Write the rule in plain language. Only the application subnet may talk to the database subnet on this port using this identity. Then export the provider objects that implement it. Add explicit denies that block lateral management protocols, peer-to-peer admin tools, and generic service discovery across boundaries. For shared services such as DNS, time, monitoring, backups, and key management, document the broker pattern that permits function while preventing arbitrary reach-through. Push logs from the boundary devices and the distributed firewall to a central place and confirm that formats align for correlation. In an assessment, you will be asked to prove a negative. Traffic from X cannot reach Y. The right answer pairs a route or policy simulation with a live packet test and a boundary log entry that records the block. Restrict administrative access everywhere, because in cloud, the quickest route to crown jewels is an overprivileged token. Require multi-factor authentication for all human administrators across the provider console, the command line, and any delegated identity broker. Force short-lived, purpose-scoped credentials for automation via roles assumed at runtime, not long-lived keys parked in variables or files. Use bastion hosts or managed session services that record command streams and browser actions. Tie elevation to change tickets and require device posture for any path that can steer production. Kill direct admin from user workstations into the cardholder data environment. Route it through controlled jump points that also write audit trails. Your artifacts are identity policies with dates, token lifetimes, session recording exports, elevation approvals, and revocation logs that show how quickly you can clamp a key gone bad. Reviewers will try to follow one admin action from request to approval to session to outcome. Make that line straight. Enable provider-native logging, flow records, and configuration tracking with retention aligned to policy, because the best evidence is the kind the platform produces automatically. Turn on API audit logs at the organization, account, or subscription level, and route them to immutable storage with lifecycle rules and access reviews. Capture VPC or VNET flow records for the subnets that matter, not just the perimeter, and keep enough detail to reconstruct conversations at useful granularity. Enable configuration trackers that snapshot resource states and emit diffs when something changes. Then feed those diffs into alerts and tickets so a human reads them before drift becomes design. Align retention with incident and legal needs, longer for control plane records, focused but sufficient for data plane flows, and prove the alignment with screenshots and retrieval tests. The assessment move is to pick a date and ask, show me what changed, who changed it, and what traffic flowed right after. Validate encryption at rest and in transit with keys stored and managed in controlled services, because enabled is not the same as governed. Prove that storage services, disks, databases, and backups encrypt at rest with provider KMS or hardware security module-backed keys. Show that key policies restrict who can use, rotate, or export them. And attach rotation evidence that names the person or process and the date. For encryption in transit, export listener configs, certificate chains, and mutual auth settings for service-to-service flows. Then sample packet captures at trusted tap points to confirm the ciphers and protocols match policy. Where private links or service endpoints bypass the public internet, document the route and the controls that keep the connection narrow and monitored. In review, a good program can answer 3 questions quickly. Which keys protect this data? Who can exercise those keys? And how do you know the session on this path is encrypted today? Inventory workloads, tags, and identities. Then reconcile them against tickets and approved change records so scope does not drift silently. Pull a list of accounts or subscriptions, projects or resource groups, virtual networks, subnets, instances, functions, containers, data stores, secrets, roles, and service principals. Standardize tags for environment, owner, data classification, and change reference, and enforce them at creation time so missing metadata cannot land. Compare that inventory to approved changes for the week and month. Variances become findings that either produce late tickets or retire stray resources before they age into risk. Do the same for identities. List human admins, automation roles, and federated applications. Remove stale or unused ones promptly, and link every powerful identity to a person or system with a reason you can read in a sentence. Your artifacts are exports, tag policies, drift reports, and the tickets that closed gaps. Assessors love reconciliations because they expose the truth of daily governance. Test isolation with packet captures, policy simulations, and cross-account or cross-tenant checks that mirror how attackers actually move. Start with simulator tools to confirm that declared routes and rules would deny unwanted paths. Follow with authenticated probes from realistic sources to prove the denial leaves a log line you can find later. For containers and serverless, use service mesh or egress policies to ensure functions cannot call arbitrary hosts. Then run canary calls to forbidden domains and show the block. Attempt cross-account role assumptions with incorrectly scoped trust and confirm they fail. Try to reach management endpoints from non-management subnets and capture the refusal. If wireless or VPN feeds enter the cloud, test split tunnel logic and verify that corporate laptops cannot bridge from public internet to private cloud without passing a gateway you control. The evidence bundle is simulations, captures, logs, and the names of observers who witnessed time and place. Collect provider attestations, certifications, and pen test summaries, then address inherited gaps locally so the chain of duty is whole. For IaaS and PaaS, obtain the statements that cover facilities, hypervisor, control plane monitoring, and key management operations. Read the scope notes carefully to learn what is not in the seal. For SaaS and managed services, collect the documents that describe how they protect customer data and how they expose configuration and logging to you. Where an inherited control stops short of your need, say flow logs exist but do not persist long enough, extend them in your tenancy and record the delta in your scope logic. Keep vendor evidence on a cadence with expiration dates and owners. Rehearse what you will ask for if an incident touches your data. The assessor will not accept the provider handles that without an artifact that names the duty and shows it operating. Document scoping logic and attach evidence so another professional can reproduce your conclusions step by step. Write the logic like a recipe. Which accounts are in scope and why? Which are out and why? Where the cardholder data can flow, and what proves the allowed and denied paths. For each claim, list the artifact class, policy export, rule set, capture, ticket, attestation, the retrieval path, and the date last sampled. Keep one annotated diagram that uses the same labels your cloud consoles use, so a reader can click into reality without translation. Place the package where change managers and assessors can both reach it, and update it when topology, identity, or providers change. Good scope is not a one-time essay. It is a living bundle that tracks the environment's shape and the evidence that supports its boundaries. Close the loop with a simple cadence that keeps cloudy complexity from drifting into myth. Tie segmentation checks to quarterly reviews, but also gate them on change. New VPNs, new peering, new managed services, new gateways, new regions, and new identity brokers should all trigger focused retests with attachments. Teach teams to add evidence collection to their definition of done. If a control changed, the screenshot and export live next to the ticket before closure. Review a small sample each month across accounts and resource types, and publish one page of metrics that track privileged identity count, stale role age, untagged resource rate, and time to revoke risky keys. Leaders learn to steer when the dials remain steady and legible. Assessors learn to trust when scope reads like a map that matches the ground. Two practical cautions belong in every cloud scoping conversation because they cause a surprising share of problems. First, management tools that see everything often ride networks and roles that reach everywhere, and if their pathways are not fenced and logged, they become the bypass you were sure did not exist. Reduce their standing power, broker their sessions, and snapshot their changes. Second, service conveniences, metadata endpoints, instance profiles, default trust policies turn helpful into hazardous when nobody narrows them. Audit for wildcards, external principals, and star grants. Replace them with short, specific statements and a habit of renewal. Your evidence is the diff. A before with broad reach, an after with tight scope, and a date that shows the fix is now the baseline. Do not forget the people who carry this system forward. Assign named owners for each policy collection, identity, network, compute, storage, logging, keys, and make their dashboards small enough that they can review them weekly. Require that each owner keeps an evidence shelf with the 3 most recent exports that prove their area remains inside guardrails, labeled with UTC timestamps and a one-line caption that says what the artifact shows. When an incident or audit question arrives, those shelves become the front line. They shorten the distance between claim and proof and keep pressure from turning into panic. Programs that survive turnover always look a little boring on purpose. They privilege legibility over cleverness and leave fewer places for surprises to hide. Finally, keep third-party and cross-team lines from blurring. If a managed detection provider ingests your logs, capture the contract that lists which feeds, how often, and how long they retain. If a development platform abstracts infrastructure, insist on exports that show the real objects underneath, networks, roles, and storage, so scope can be verified at the layer that matters. If a business unit runs an autonomous account, bind it to organization policies that enforce logging, tagging, identity baselines, and VPN standards by construction rather than persuasion. Scope that depends on goodwill will fray. Scope that depends on guardrails and tests will last. The PCIP lens always returns to the same question. Can you prove this boundary and this control today with artifacts a stranger can read? Close with one concrete move you can complete now. Select a single cloud workload that touches payment functions, an application stack, a data pipeline, or a batch settlement job, and revalidate its scope end to end. Export the network rules that isolate it, the identity policies that govern it, the logs that observe it, and the keys that protect it. Run one deny test that should fail and capture the block. Run one allow test that should succeed and capture the encryption and the logs it leaves behind. Update the evidence pack with today's artifacts, link the change tickets that adjusted anything you fixed, and add a one-page scoping note that a colleague could follow tomorrow. With that small, defensible package in hand, you will have practiced the real craft behind cloud scope. Not slogans, not wishful diagrams, but boundaries you can show, controls you can test, and a story any assessor can replay without your help. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.